All right, hello again, everyone. Congratulations for making it through your first unit of Intermediate Micro. I hope you've had a chance to recover a little bit from the midterms, and I'm excited to have you back with me working through another set of material. So before I do anything else, I want to just take a minute to introduce what we're going to do in our second unit of microtheory. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the tools we've used to understand the decisions of consumers, and we're going to shift focus to producers, right? So instead of thinking about consumers deciding what's best for them and choosing products, we're going to think about producers deciding how much of different kinds of products they want to produce and what inputs they want to use in production, right? How many workers they want to hire, how much capital they want to use, etc. Once we've done that, once we have a good model of both producers and consumers, we're going to put all of that work together to understand the economy in a bigger picture. That's going to include practical analysis, answering questions like, if wages go up for workers, how is that going to affect the quantity of various products sold? It's also going to involve more conceptual and philosophical questions. Questions like, what problems in society can or can't be solved effectively with market mechanisms? Will a free market left by itself produce outcomes that are fair or just according to different understandings, different philosophical understandings of justice? Will they produce outcomes that are efficient? Meaning that they don't essentially leave welfare on the table, right? They're at least as good for each individual as any other outcome. So in doing that, this is to me the most exciting part of this class, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working through what is probably the most influential work of pure theory, with maybe the alternative of Karl Marx's work, but probably the most influential work of theory in the last 200 years. And I'm not just going to be handing it to you, right, and saying, here's what some smart person thought 100 years ago. We're going to be working through it together so that you can understand what's happening and draw your own conclusions about what to do with this theory, the degree to which you think that it is a good description of the world and its conclusions should be taken very seriously, the degree to which you think that it's an incomplete description of the world. And once we've done that, right, we're going to be able to understand questions like, when should we leave markets to their own devices, right? When is that going to lead to the best possible outcome? And if we don't want to leave markets to their own devices, if we want to regulate markets, if we want to replace markets entirely with some other set of institutions to decide how to allocate resources or who should get what we should produce, what problems would those alternative institutions have to solve, and how likely are they to be able to solve those problems? So I'm really excited about this. I'm glad that you're going to be along for this. I think this is the most fun we're going to have maybe in the whole econ major, but it's going to be a weird and challenging ride. So I'm looking forward to working on it with you, and of course very excited to help you along the way. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing over, let's say, the next month. But what we're going to do today is we're going to start working out the theory of the firm. So ultimately what this is about, right, this is understanding production decisions. It's going to be understanding, given certain sets of input prices and output prices, market conditions, how much of various types of products are going to be produced, and which types of firms are going to produce those products and how. Now, the reason this is important, the reason we care about firms, is because if we understand the decisions of firms, we can answer questions like, if we impose a steel tariff, is that going to increase or decrease employment in, say, the auto industry or in manufacturing more broadly? Or if we implement minimum wages, is that going to result in higher or lower employment? Right, we might want to understand things like what sorts of agricultural policy are going to lead to higher or lower food prices, or greater or lesser problems with obesity. And we're not just going to want to kind of get generic answers to those questions, right? Not just going to want to say minimum wage is good or minimum wage is bad. We're going to want to understand in a richer way in what contexts these policies will have positive or negative effects, for whom they'll have positive and negative effects, and why they'll have those effects. So that's what we're trying to do. Now, a lot of what we've done with consumers is going to apply directly to firms. We're going to draw graphs and solve problems that look a lot like the graphs and problems you've already solved. But there's a really, really important distinction that I want to draw right away. So with consumers, which really I mean people, right? What we basically said, right, the fundamental of what we've spent the last month doing, is saying that consumers are going to do whatever is best for them, given their options, right? So their goal is to maximize their own well-being. Or, we have this jargony term for this, right? We say maximize their utility, subject to a constraint. Right, in other words, if I'm a consumer, I find out what all my available options are, and then I pick whichever one is best for me personally, right? According to my own values or my own preferences or my own desires. On the other hand, when we talk about producers, which we'll call firms, we're going to assume that what producers care about is maximizing profits. And there's a really important difference between trying to maximize utility and maximizing profit. And that difference is preferences or utility is subjective, right? In other words, you and I might have the exact same choices, right? Have the same amount of money in our pocket and face the same prices for, let's say, burritos or tacos. And you might decide to buy different stuff than me, right? That's completely allowed, that's completely above board, because you and I are different from each other, right? And we're allowed to care about different things. On the other hand, profit is objective. Right? When I say that I'm maximizing profit, I'm saying after I'm done paying my workers and paying my capital and paying my rent, right? How much money do I have left over? How much are my revenues minus my costs? And if you and I face the same problem, right? We're running firms with the same technology, the same options available to us, selling at the same prices. The way for me to maximize my profit is going to be exactly the same as the way that you maximize your profit. So, right, so when we're talking about consumers, a lot of what we did comes down to, well, the optimal choice here is going to depend a lot on the particulars of this person, right? What this person likes, what this person cares about, and at some level that's a little bit unknowable, right? So if we're making predictions about how our kinks and budget constraints or other things can affect people, those are always going to be somewhat contingent. If we're willing to make this assumption about firms, that firms are all trying to do the same thing, all trying to maximize profit, then we're going to be able to make much more specific predictions about the way that changes in the firm's problems affect the firm's decisions. Because we're going to say we know exactly and specifically what the firm is trying to do. Okay, cool. All right, great. So we've established, right, what firms are trying to do. We've said that firms are trying to maximize profits. But there's another problem we need to talk about, which is even if we know what firms do, what firms are trying to do, what exactly is a firm, right? What are we talking about when we talk about firms? And that actually gets a little bit more complicated than it seems at first. So let's think about a specific example. I don't know if you guys know, if you go down to York Boulevard off of campus, you run across the Bob Barker Marionette Theater. If you've never been inside, you might have still seen the people moving their marionettes around all up and down the boulevard. Personally, I didn't know that I was scared of puppets until I saw the Bob Barker Marionette Theater. So if you go down to the Bob Barker Marionette Theater, let's try to figure out what the firm is, right? As opposed to what inputs in production or something else is. So we go down there, right? We'll see the big building with the marquee, lights, chairs, stage, right? We'll see the puppets, we'll see the people, moving the puppets around, all sorts of artsy people taking tickets or putting on shows, right? And I think he's dead now, but let's imagine he's not, right? Bob Barker himself is there, he's ordering everybody around, he's ordering more puppets on the phone, right? He's deciding what they're gonna, what shows they're gonna put on next year or next week, right? So which of all these things, right? The puppets, the theater, the puppeteers, Bob Barker, which of these is the actual firm? So the building is not a firm, right? The building isn't the firm, it's an input in production, right? If the Bob Barker Theater closed tomorrow, the building would still exist, someone else would move in, it would turn into a donut factory or something, right? So the building can't be the firm. Likewise, right, if we think about the puppeteers, right, the people who work at the theater, they're not the firm either, right? They're employees. And if we think that firms are trying to maximize their profit, those employees can't possibly be the firm, because none of these people show up and say, I am trying to maximize profit at the expense of everything else, right? Even if they're trying to maximize their income, they certainly wouldn't work as puppeteers, right? What they're doing is they're being humans and they're doing what humans do, right? They're maximizing their utility. They're deciding, how much time do I want to spend working? How many breaks do I want to take? Do I want to spend time hanging out gossiping with my friends instead of practicing, right? They're making all of these trade-offs that we've attributed to consumers, right, or suppliers of labor. So building isn't the firm, lights aren't the firm, chairs aren't the firm, workers aren't the firm, puppets aren't the firm, right? So this brings us to our final candidate. It's probably what you thought about to begin with, which is that Bob Barker must be the firm, right? After all, he's in charge of everything, right? It's his name on the theater. He's the one calling the shots, right? Deciding what shows they're gonna put on, how many people to hire or fire, right? How many chairs to put in the audience, making all these sorts of executive decisions. But Bob Barker isn't trying to maximize profits either, right? Bob Barker is a person. If Bob Barker's back hurts in the middle of the day, he might decide to go home and take an aspirin, even though that might not maximize his profits. If Bob Barker knew that he would actually make a little bit more money if instead of putting on kid-friendly puppet shows, he put on really grotesque and gory puppet shows, he might decide not to do that because he doesn't want to, right? Because he doesn't like doing that kind of work. It's pretty likely, especially in this case, right? It's pretty likely that the reason that Bob Barker is putting on puppet shows to begin with is because he's trying to maximize his utility, right? Do something that he enjoys, rather than because he's trying to create a business that has the highest possible monetary return. So if we say that he's in charge and that makes him the firm, then we can't quite say that firms maximize profits. And if we want to say, which we do, if we want to say that firms are trying to maximize profits, then Bob Barker, right, the CEO or the owner of the firm, can't be the firm. So the way that we can think about this, the way that I think about this, is we can almost split Bob Barker into two people, right, or two personalities. The first is Bob Barker the person, right, the human being whose back hurts, who likes some kinds of puppet shows more than others, who maybe hires some people not because they're going to make him money, but because he likes having young people around to mentor. In other words, the human being, Bob Barker the human being. And then the other side is Bob Barker the profit maximizing machine, right? And the way that we can say that firms maximize profits is to say that Bob Barker the profit maximizing machine is essentially employing Bob Barker the person. And they get into a negotiation. So Bob Barker the person says, all right, you know what, I want to go home because my back hurts. Bob Barker the profit maximizing machine says, okay, fine, but I'm going to dock your pay, right? In other words, you're going to make less profit. I'm going to pay you less as the employee, right? As the person employed as the CEO or the decision maker. And as a result, the firm is still going to try to maximize profits. Now, ultimately what we're saying, when we say that we've turned this into Bob Barker the person and then the firm that's employing Bob Barker, is that all the firm is, right? The firm doesn't have hands, the firm doesn't have legs, the firm doesn't have a building. All the firm is what we'll call a technology of production, which is to say that Bob Barker's Marionette Theater is a particular way of bringing together raw materials and people and CEOs and creativity and all of these different inputs and turning them into a particular product, right? In this case, puppet shows. And each of those actual physical, incarnate, real-world elements are just factors of production. We can think of them as types of labor, types of capital, types of land, that the firm has to compensate in order to get them to work at the firm. Does this make sense? So in some ways, this is a very strange way to think about the world. It's a very strange way to think about firms. But it's in many ways very powerful because of the fact that it allows us to argue that every firm is fundamentally motivated by the same thing. And what this will mean in practice is that if Bob Barker the human, or any other business owner the human, has demands, right, as an employee that are incompatible with the demands of the market, incompatible with profit maximization, then the technology of production essentially fires them. In other words, if Bob Barker wants to put on shows that don't get enough demand, he's not going to be able to run the theater anymore. And so we can say, and there's a lot of really interesting economic theory, some of my favorite economic theory is centered on exactly this question of when will market forces allow or not allow individual owners of firms to make decisions incompatible with profit motives. Okay, so that's that. Let's talk more concretely now.